Morning, students. This is Vivek Mirde, your faculty and coach for the subject business environment. We are again back with our subject, and so far we have studied a number of things. In the previous session, we have studied the impact of the society into businesses, and we have analyzed the impact of the society through various angles. So that has been a very important enlightening topic, which has showed how the various products and the things they get impacted when they are being promoted, launched, or business into the different zones of the world. And there are multiple challenges which we have seen, multiple examples in the caselets we have seen in the previous session, previous topic. Moving on to the topic or to this lab, now we are going to a very important aspect where we'll be studying about the various things which impact the organization which are beyond the limit and they are part of the macro environment. So we will be studying the impact of the industrial policies and the regulations into the businesses. First, we need to understand about the industrial policies. The industrial policies and the regulations determine to the large extent the businesses, opportunities, and the threats. They also set certain limits and the norms for the conduct of the business. Thus, the government of the India policies and regulations have affected the pattern and the pace of the development of not only the industrial sector but also the economy in general. Until 1991, the scope of the private sector industry was very limited because of the prominence given to the public sector in the industrial policy. Large firms in particular were subjected to the severe restrictions, and the industrial policy announced in 1991 marked the dawn of the new business environment in India. Through this part, we will present some of the salient features of the industrial policy and the regulatory environment, and it review the industrial policy and licensing and the changing role and the scope of the public and the private sectors, including privatization. It also deals with some specific regulations, that is, company law regulations in respect of the patents and the trademarks and the competition law. This, moving to the topic, we will be starting with a topic called industrial policy. In this industrial policy, we will be reading or we will be studying in detail about the industrial policy up to 1991. Then the new industrial policy, which was announced in the year 1991, that is called as a new industrial policy. Then the evaluation of the new policy and supporting schedules of the industrial policy resolution 1956 will also be seen if we get the time limits. So the industrial policy up to 1991 is the initial part. Remember, there is no other economic policy in India which has so dominantly determined the pattern and the direction of the development of the economy as the industrial policy. To a large extent, the industrial policy reflected the social, economic, political ideology of the development. Indeed, the industrial policy resolution of 1956, the fundamental principles of which remained until 1991 were described by some people as economic constitution of India. The industrial policy indicated the respective roles of the public, private, joint, and the cooperative sectors, small, medium, large-scale industries, and underlined the national priorities and the economic development strategies. It also expressed government's policies towards the foreign capital and the technology, labor policy, tariff policy, etc. In respect of the industrial sector, in short, the industrial development and thereby the economic development of the very significant extent has been guided, regulated, and fostered by the industrial policy. The industrial policy of the Government of India and the regulatory measures towards the achievement of the policy objectives has been matter of severe controversy. While the industrialists and many others in India and abroad and many foreign governments and international development organizations regarded the policy as too restrictive and the regulations and the procedures too cumbersome and perplexing, the leftist in India has been demanding a more restrictive regime. The industrial policy and the regulation has grown more and more restrictive until about the mid-70s. Having realized the deleterious effects of the restrictive regime, the 1980s saw a very slow process of liberalization. In tune with the economic reforms assured in 1991, the industrial policy too underwent a drastic change. The era of deregulation ushered in by Narasimha Rao government in 1991 acknowledgement of the failure of the control regime to deliver the goods. The Indian planners were fascinated and influenced by the Russian model, so that the development strategy in India was directed towards creating socialist pattern of the society. It is interesting to note that following the introduction of the political and the economic reforms in the erstwhile USSR, the Soviet newspaper Ilviza, which observed that many elements of the Indian system were borrowed from the Soviet model, stated that the main culprit of the present economic crisis in India was the obsolete economic system based on socialism. Thus, the following pages provide the silent features of the industrial policy of India up to 1991, whichever very briefly, and the new policy and the detailed account of the policy until 91 is available in the old edition of the business and the government and the business government environment. The industrial policy up to 1991. The industrial policies of India prior to the liberalization assured in 1991 was characterized by the following features: reservation of industries. Further, future development of most of the import industries were exclusively reserved for the public sector. Manufacture of large number over 850 in 1991 of the items were reserved for the small scale sectors. Then the dominance of the public sector. The dominance of the government was to ensure that the public sector gained control over the commanding heads of the economy. The Industrial Policy Resolution of 1948 established the public sector monopoly near the monopoly in 9 industries. The Industrial Resolution of 1956 brought out in the light of the adoption of the Parliament of the socialist pattern of the society as the national goal in the second five-year plan model, which gave emphasis to the basic and the heavy industries, further expanded substantially the role of the public sector. Further development of the 17 most important industries was exclusively reserved for the public sector under the Schedule A. Further, the public sector was assigned priority to the establishment of the new units in the 12 most important and the remaining industries under the Schedule B, for which the details are even shared in the Annexure 11.1 for the list of the industries in the Schedule A and B. The public sectors also established in the monopoly for the dominations in the several other industries which does not belong to any of the above two categories of the industries. This was done by the government by not giving license to the private enterprises or by the nationalism. Thus, there were entry and the growth restrictions. There were large number of entry and the growth restrictions in the private sector, particularly on the large firms and the foreign firms, even in respect of the industries where the private sector was allowed. The licenses was mandatory for establishing the new units in investments above a specified limit for manufacturing new products and for the substantial expansion of the existing undertakings. Large firms which are having the assets, including those interconnected undertakings of rupees 100 crore or more, and the dominant undertakings, that is those having market share of 25% or more, had to obtain the clearance under the Monopolies and the Restricted Trade Practices Act, that is MRTP Act, in addition to the industrial license for establishing the new undertakings, substantial expansions and manufacturing of the new items. There were also restrictions to import on the capital goods, etc. Thus, the restrictions on the foreign capital and the technology, the scope of use of the foreign capital and the technology was limited. Even in the industries where the foreign capital was allowed, it was normally subjected to the ceiling of 40% of the total equity. Although the exceptions were allowed in certain cases, operations of the foreign companies in India and issues of the securities bought by the Indian companies were regulated under the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, FARA 1973. Then the new industrial policy 1991. The new industrial policy was announced on July 4, 1991, which heard the economic reforms in India and has enormously expanded the scope of private sector by opening up most of the industries in the private sector and substantially dismantling the entry and the growth restrictions. These adjectives such as private sector and substantially dismantling the entry and the growth restrictions, adjectives such as dramatic, revolutionary, drastic, etc. have been used to describe the nature of the change in the industrial policy. The silent features of the new policy are as follows. The objectives. The major objective of the new industrial policy packaging are to build on the gains already made, to correct the distortions or the weakness that may be corrected, to maintain the sustained growth in the productivity and gain full employment, to attain the international competitiveness. It has been stated that the pursuit of these objectives will be tempered by the need to preserve the environment and ensure the efficient use of the available resources. All sectors of the industry, whether small, medium, or large, belonging to the public, private, or the cooperative sectors, will be encouraged to grow and improve of their past performances. Thus, the redefinition of the role of the public sector came into the picture. The role of the public sector was redefined and the scope of the public sector has been drastically abridged. The number of industries reserved for the public sector was reduced to 8 and it was later plunged in the stages of 2, atomic and the railway transport. The policies also seek selective privatization and the withdrawal of the public sector from industries which does not conform to the redefined role. Since the chapter on the public sectors are over there in detail. The expansion of the scope of the private sector and dismantling of the entry and the growth restrictions. The scope of the private sector has been expanded in the new industry policy 1991 and which is enormously by the drastically reducing the number of industries reserved for the public sector and by substantially dismantling the barriers to the entry and the growth. Delicensing all all but 18 industries were freed from licensing. The number was later reduced in stages to 6. The industries subject to the industrial licensing account for only a very small share of the value added in the manufacturing sector. The removal of the MRTPA restrictions, most of the provisions for the MRTPA Act pertaining to the concentration of the economic power, that is, those requiring the prior permission for the establishment of the new undertaking, substantial expansion, manufacturing, or the new items and the mergers and the acquisitions were scrapped. In case the liberalization of the foreign investment, the policy towards the foreign capital of the technology has been modified very significantly and progressively liberalized. FDI is allowed at all industries except industries which are falling in the small negative list in varying levels ranging from 26% to 100% of the total equity. Since 1992-93, the Indian stock market is open for investment by the foreign institutional investors, that is FIIs, and the Indian companies satisfying certain conditions may access foreign capital markets by the euro issues. Related measures, the progressive interaction of the Indian economy with the global economy has been acknowledged as one of the objectives of the interim acknowledged as one of the objectives of the EXIM policy. The import policy has been made more liberal by drastically reducing the tariff levels and the quantitative restrictions and by the procedural reforms. Another very significant change has been the reforms of the foreign exchange rate policy. The rupee was made partially convertible on the current and later it was made fully convertible. The measures have been initiated to move towards the capital account convertibility. The Capital Issues Control Act and the Office of the Controller of the Capital Issues was scrapped and free pricing of the capital issues were introduced. Price controls have been gradually eased out. Thus, the several restrictions imposed in respect of the foreign investments like the phased manufacturing program, foreign exchange balancing, etc. has been and by and large removed. Thus, the evaluation of the new policy. The economic reforms ushered in since 1991 are revolutionary indeed in comparison with the policy and the procedural reforms Heathrow attempted in India. It undoubtedly is a bold step in the direction of freeing the Indian industry from the shackles of the abortive and the crippling controls. Although further policy changes and reforms are needed, the changes already introduced, if implemented in the real earnest, while certainly provide a considerable growth impetus. However, bureaucrating is the challenging task. The bureaucracy has a tendency to attempt to defeat the measures aimed at the deregulations. A strong mandate and the political will and bold administrative measures are essential for implementing several of the proposals. The government, however, often shows signs of confusion and lack of boldness on the face of opposition from trade unions, politicians, and bureaucrats. There will certainly be strong opposition from these groups to protect their vested interest. For example, in the face of strong opposition from the trade unions, the government stance on the privatization has not been clear. In our country, might of the organized minority often gets prominence over the rights and the welfare of the unorganized majority. The policy environment now in India is more conducive for both domestic and foreign investments than in the past. However, there are now the host of the countries trying to go foreign investments, which much more conducive environment than in India. Further, the cultural factors also tilt the balances in favor of other nations so far as the foreign investment is concerned. Further, the foreign businesses still regard the policy and the procedural system in India perplexing. Even many Indian entrepreneurs feel that the policy, procedural, and the development environments in a country like China are much superior to that in India. and the number of them prefer to locate production based abroad. Thus, the development of the infrastructural sector has been steady in India even after the liberalization. Because of these factors, one should not expect wonders out of the patent measures. However, for the first time, the domestic industry has been given a considerable leeway to improve its metal. This dynamism, coupled with the enhanced external collaboration and competition, and should be expected to provide a considerable momentum for the development. At the same time, the government should strive to remove the remaining long and implement the proposed reforms in letter and discipline. Although the economic policy liberalization of 1991 came in sketching criticism by opposition parties, when these parties drew up the election manifestos in the April 1996 after anti-liberalization stands of the conspicuous and by inconspicuous. More interestingly, when the short-lived BJP government and the United Front government that followed announced their economic policies, they amounted not only to endorsing the liberalization policy ushered in by the Congress government under the Narasimha Rao, but also to carrying forward the process of deregulation and decontrol to achieve the faster economic growth. Thus, the economic policy of the United Front, the UF government, are expressed in the Common Minimum Program (CMP), which observed that there was no substitute for the growth in the country's GDP need to grow at over 7% in the next 10 years in order to abolish the endemic poverty and the employment. Stated that the UF government is committed to foster the economic growth. Thus, the documents on the CMP observed that the further deregulation and the decontrol might be required in the agricultural, industrial, and other sectors to accelerate the economic development. In short, India's economic liberalization is almost unanimously accepted by all political parties, so that it is irreversible. The Union Budget 2001-2 was hailed for initiating the second generation reforms. Whichever political party or the combined come to power in the future, the difference will be at most in its fine tuning. In other words, the major differences between the political parties in India will no more be related to the economic policies or the ideologies. The difference will pertain rather to ethnic and related factors, including the issue of the secularism and the regional factors. The unambitious support of the liberalization seen now is due to the good liberalization which can do for the economic development of the country, and the development since 1991 have demonstrated the growth of competitiveness impulse and the liberalization can generate. There is a lot of lessons to be learned from the Chinese experience of liberalization. Thus, we can summarize that until 1991, the industrial policy of India was characterized by the monopoly or the dominant role of the public sector in strategic base and the heavy industries, preference for the small scale units and the reservations of the large scale number of items for the SSI sector, small scale industry sector, preferences for the cooperative sector and the joint sectors in several areas, or host of the entry, growth and the operational functions restrictions on the private sector, and a very restrictive attitude towards the foreign capital and the technology. Thus, the industry policy announced in July 1991, along with the other economic policy changes and the measures ushered in the process of economic reforms in India. Now, there are no entry and growth restrictions on the private sector, except there is a very small number of industries. The policies towards the foreign capital and the technology has been substantially liberalized. Imports have been very significant, liberalized. Quantitative restrictions on the imports by and large have been removed. Now, this particular table gives you the comparison of the pre-1991 policy and the current policy of post-1991, in which the pre-1991 policy said the industrial licensing was a rule, but the new policy says licensing is an exception. Earlier policy says that the public sector has the monopoly or the dominance in basic and the heavy industries, but the new policies that says that two industries are all but rather just two, that is railways and the atomic, are open to the private sectors. So apart from the two, all the sectors are open for the private sectors, and therefore we had seen a drastic change into the Indian economy and Indian market. Then pre-1991 MRTP Act restriction on the entry and the growth of the large companies was applicable. Post 1991, no such restriction was applicable. Pre-1991, the foreign investments allowed only in the select industries that were subject to the normally a ceiling of 40% of the total equity in the prior permission. With respect to the new policy, the foreign investment allowed in the large number of industries, including up to 100% of the equity in many of them, automatic route available subject to the specified conditions. Restrictive policy towards the foreign technology was very before 1991 there was a very strong restrictive policies towards the foreign technologies and the foreign market. But pre 1990 post 1991 the policies for the foreign technologies were liberal and were supportive. Then pre 1991 the reservations of the large number of products for the small scale sector was high. With respect to the new policy, the reservation list has been pruned. Now you can see the schedules and the annexes. There's the schedules of the new industry policy 1956, which is over there. Under the Schedule A, the industry reserved for the public sector. These are the Schedule A, that is for those sectors, those industries before 1991. Under the Schedule A, industry reserved only for the public sector were arms and ammunition, atomic energy, iron and steel, heavy casting and the forging of the iron and steel, heavy plants and machinery required for the iron and steel production. Therefore, mining, for machine tools manufacture, for such other basic industries which will be specified by the central government. Then heavy electrical plants which are including of the hydraulic and steam turbines, coal and lignite, mineral and oils, mining of the iron ore, manganese ore, ore, gypsum, sulfur, diamond and gold. Mining and processing of the copper, lead, zinc, tin, molybdenum and the wolfram. Minerals specified in the Schedule of the Atomic Energy, that is control of the production and use for 1953, aircraft, air transport, railway transport, shipbuilding, telephones, telephone cables, telegraphs, wireless apparatus, central generation and the distribution of the energy. Whereas under the Schedule B, the industries where public sectors had priority in establishing the new unit. All other minerals except the minor minerals that were defined in the Section 3 of the Minerals Concession Rules of 1949. Aluminium and other ferrous metals which are not included in the Schedule A, machine tools, ferroalloys and the tool steels, basic and intermediate product required by the chemical industries such as manufacturing of the drugs, dyestuffs and plastics, antibiotics and other essential drugs, fertilizers, synthetic rubber, carbonization of the coal, chemical pulp, road transport, sea transport is all over there. So, thus we can summarize that in 1990s, the government of India, in order to come out of the economic crisis, decided to deviate from its previous economic policies, and they leaned towards the privatization. Thus, in July 1991, on 24th July 1991, when the devaluation of the Indian currency took place, the government started announcing the new economic policies one after another. Through these policies pertain to different aspects of the economic field, and they had one thing in common. The economic elements was to orient the Indian system towards the world globalization, privatization, and the globalization. In the presence of the mere globalized environment all over the world, the policies of the country act as a key determinant for getting the real benefits of the same. Thus, particularly for the developing nations, the government policies largely affect its economic environment. And thus, after the adoption of the new economic policies in India, the country had reviewed its policies and made it friendlier in almost all sectors. And this, the policy one section will be covering, we have covered all those policies which were formulated on the different sectors. So this is about this part. Now we are going to go with the second topic, that is IRDA and the industrial licensing. Because the IRDA and the industrial licensing, in this will be covering on the two parts. One is called as the Industries Development and the Regulation Act, IRDA, and then the industrial licensing. See, the policy which can affect and implement the objectives achieved only if the government has the power to make the basis required for this purpose. It is with this purpose that the Industries Development and the Regulation Act was passed in 1951. Until the economic liberalization ushered in 1991, the entry into the business, growth and expansion of the firms were regulated by the licensing exercised by the central government under the Act. Thus, the Industry Development and the Regulation Act, the Industries Development and the Regulation Act 1951 aimed amended from time to time, is one of the most effective weapons of the government possesses to regulate the development and to control the activities of the industrial sector. The main object of the Act is to provide the central government with the means to implement their industrial policy. Thus, the principal objective of the IDRA is to empower the government to take necessary steps for the development of the industries, to regulate the pattern and direction of the industrial development, to control the activities, performance, and results of the industrial undertakings in the public interest. Thus, the main provisions, the IDR Act contains provisions to realize the above objectives. Some of the salient features of the Act are as follows. First is the development measure. The Act provides the establishment of the central government of the Central Advisory Council, consists of the representatives of the owners of the industrial undertakings, employees, consumers, primary suppliers, etc., for the purpose of advertising the central government on the matters concerning the development of the industries. It also provides the establishment of the schedule. It also provides the establishment of the scheduled industries for the purpose of the scheduled industries. A development council consists of members representing the interests of the owners, employees, consumers, etc., and the persons having the special knowledge of the matter relating to the technical and the other aspects of the industries for the purpose such as recommending measures for improving the performance of the industries. Next over here is the regulation of the entry and the growth. The IDR Act empowers the central government to regulate the development of the industries by the means of licensing with suitable exemptions as decided by the government. According to this, the entry into the business or the expansion of the existing businesses may be regulated by licensing, supervision, and the control. The government under this act can make a full and complete investigations if it is of the opinion that in respect of any scheduled industries or undertaking, if there has been or likely to be substantial fall in the volume of the output or marked deterioration in the quality of the output or unjustifiable rise in the price of the output. Second, an industrial undertaking is managed in a manner highly determinable of the scheduled industries concerned or to the public interest. Thus, consequent upon the investigation, as I mentioned above, the government is empowered to issue such directions to the industrial undertakings and undertakings for all of any of the following purposes. Namely, first, the regulating the production of any article or the class of the articles by industrial undertakings or undertaking and fixing the standard of production. Second, requiring the industrial undertakings or undertakings to take such steps as a central government can be considered necessary to stimulate the development of the industries which the undertaking or undertaking relates or relate. Third, prohibiting the industrial undertakings or undertakings from restoring to any act or practices which might reduce its or their production capacity or economic values, and controlling the prices, regulating the distribution of any article or the class of the articles which have been subject matter of the investigations. Thus, the Act also provides that any direction of the above nature may be issued by the central government or at any time may when the case relating to any industry or industrial undertakings or undertakings is under investigation. Such a direction has been very effective until it is varied and revoked by the central government for the purpose of ascertaining the position of working of any industrial undertakings or for other purposes mentioned in the Act. The rules made thereunder any person authorized by the central government is on this behalf can enter and inspect any premises, order the production of any document, book, register, or record in possession and power of any person having the control of or employed in connection with any industrial undertakings and examine any persons having the control of or employed in connection with any industrial undertakings. Next in this is the takeover of the management. The power of the control entrusted by the central government under the IRDA extends to that the takeover of the management of the whole or any part of the industrial undertakings which fails to comply with any of the directions mentioned above. The government can also take over the management of any undertaking which has been managed in the manner highly determinable to the scheduled industry concerned or to the public interest. Further, the central government can take over the management of the industrial undertakings owned by the company under the liquidation with the permission of the High Court. If the government is of the opinion that the running or restarting the operations of such an undertaking is necessary for maintaining or increasing the production, supply or distribution in the public interest. In respect of the industrial undertaking, the management of which has been taken over by the government, the IRDA empowers the government to take the steps in the appropriate cases to liquidate or reconstruct the company concerned in the public interest. Thus, the prices and the distribution control. The next topic, the prices and the distribution control for securing the equitable distribution and availability of the fair prices of any article or the class of the articles relatable to the scheduled industry. The central government is empowered to control its or their supply, distribution, and the price. The exemption, the central government is empowered to exempt any industrial undertakings or the class of the industrial undertakings or scheduled industry or the class of the scheduled industries from all or any of the provisions of the Act in certain cases in the public interest. The next topic in this topic is the industrial licensing. The Industries Development Regulation Act IDRA 1951 empowers the central government to regulate the establishment and certain activities of the industrial undertakings by the means of licensing. The licensing provisions of the IDRA may apply to the industrial undertaking set up by a person or authority, including the government. A license is a written permission from the government to an industrial undertaking to the manufacturer specified articles included in the schedule of the Act. If a new company has to be formed, the industrial license is first instance is issued in the name of the applicant, and later when the company has been formed, the necessary endorsement to that effect will be made in the license. If an application of the license is approved, the further clearance such as foreign collaboration and the capital goods imports are not involved and no other prior conditions have to be fulfilled, an industrial license is issued to the applicant. In other cases, the letter of intent is issued, which will later be covered into the license of fulfilling the conditions stipulated in the letter of intent, and if other words, the letter of intent conveys the intention of the government to grant a license subject to the fulfillment of the great conditions. Thus, the conditions to be fulfilled relate to the approval of foreign investment proposals, import of the capital goods, applications to be made to the financial institutions taking steps to control the pollution, etc. A letter of intent enables the applicants to finalize and formulate the proposals on the matters relating to the terms of foreign collaboration, import of the capital equipments, and or issue of the capital with assurance that if the proposals are otherwise found satisfactory, an industrial license will be issued. Prior to the economic liberalization assured in 1991, the licensing is means to help achieve some of the objectives of the economic policy, such as desired pattern of the industrial dispersal, encouraging new entrepreneurs, wider dispersal of the industrial ownerships, prevention of the concentration of the economic power, protection and promotion of the small scale sector, regulation of the foreign capital and the technology, use of the proper technology and the scale economies, achieving the demand supply balance, promotions of the exports and the import substitution or employment generation. Thus, the projects involving investment up to the specified limits were exempted from licensing, subject to the certain conditions. The exempted limit was periodically revised upwards. Therefore, the announcement of the new industrial policy, the limit was just 50 crores in the non-backward areas and 50 crores in the backward areas. The new policy, industrial policy announced in 1991, has abolished industrial licensing irrespective of the level of the investments, and all other industries exempt specified industries. There has been a subsequent liberalization, and now all industrial undertakings are exempt from obtaining an industrial license to the manufacturer, except for industries reserved for the public sector. Second, industries retained under the compulsory licensing. Third, items of the manufacturers reserved for the small scale sector. Fourth, if the proposal attracts local locational restrictions. Thus, industries for which industrial licensing is compulsory now are the following: distillation and brewing of the alcoholic drinks, cigars and cigarettes of the tobacco and manufactured tobacco substitutes, electronic, aerospace and the defense equipments of all types, industrial explosive including the detoning fuses, safety fuses, compounder, nitrocellulose in the matches, and certain specified hazardous chemicals. Note the compulsory licensing provides provisions will not apply in respect of the small scale units taking up the manufacture of any of the above items reserved for exclusive manufacture in the small scale sector. A pursuer of above list would indicate that it is due to the reason of the hazardous nature of the production, environment concern, and health of the social concern that some industries are still subject to licensing. Industrial undertakings exempt from obtaining industrial licensing are required to file an industrial entrepreneur memorandum (IEM) with the Secretariat of Industries Assistance (SIA) and the Department of the Industry Policy and the Promotion, Government of India, and obtain acknowledgement. And thus, no further approval is required. Now, the location policy: the industrial undertakings are free to select the location of the project. In case of the cities with a population of more than a million, as per the census, however, proposed the location should be at least 25 kilometers away from the standard urban area limits of the city, unless it is to be located in the area designated as industrial area before 25th July 1991. Thus, the electronic computer software printing and any other industries which will be notified in future as a non-political industries are exempted from such locational restrictions. Relaxation in the aforesaid locational restriction is possible if an industrial license is obtained as per the notified procedures. Thus, the location of the industrial licenses is further regulated by the local zoning and land use regulation and also by the environmental regulations. Hence, even if the requirements of the locational policy stated above is fulfilled, the local zoning and the land use regulations of the state government or the regulation of the Ministry of the Environment does not permit setting up the industries at a location. Thus, the entrepreneurs will be required to abide by their decision. Thus, in the end, we can conclude that the provisions of the Industrial Development and the Regulation Act 1951, the industrial sector has extensive control by the central government until 1991. This sector has been regarded as the very Trankian by one of the industrialists and many economists and others. It has been alleged that government has obsessed with the scope of regulations under the Development and the Regulation Act, relegating development to the back burner. Thus, the license permit Raj gave rise to the rampant regulation. Several people argue that the act has lost its relevance and now, therefore, this central act should be repealed. It may be noted that the economic liberalization norm of economy for the people in the a lot of responsibility for the development of the industry has been shifted to the states. Under the control regime, the central government has a dominant say of the location of the industries. Now that most of the entry and the growth restrictions and the reservations of the industries for the public sector has been dismantled, it is up to the state government to promote the industries in the state. Thus, we can summarize that the licensing under the Act was required to make the new investments above the specified limit, and the manufacturing a new item, that is an item which is not included in the existing licensing by the existing undertaking, substantial expansion of the existing capacity and for certain other purposes. Thus, the central government was also empowered to regulate the production, quality, supply, price, and distribution of the products of the industrial undertakings. Under this act, the government can also take over the management of the industrial undertakings in the public interest, and the silent features of this act are protected. Now, a small number of industries are subject to the licensing. These industries continue to be under the licensing due to the reasons of the hazardous nature of the production, environment concern, health, and the safety concerns. This particular image shows silent features of the IRDA. The IRDA Act discussed all the two great broad parts. The first is the development provisions and second is the regulatory provisions. Under the development, we focus on through the support of the advisory council and the development council. But in case to regulate that is how to manage the day-to-day operations or to monitor and control, there is a regulation of the conduct of the management of the businesses, and also there is a regulation of the entry into the and growth of the business. Thus, the conduct of business was the main thing. It is controlled on the three verticals. First, by the supervision, investigation, and the inspection. Second is regulation of the production, supply, and price and distribution. Third is takeover of the management. So this is all regarding this part. The next topic we will be studying one day. Thank you. This is side of Tildy and coach Vivek Brother. You can connect back to me on the email ID vivekb.management@emi.ac.in in case of any queries, doubts, or having anything you need to discuss. Thank you. Looking forward to see you in the next session on the new topic.